Ma'am, you've been standing here too long. Show me your ID.
I'm waiting for a ride share. I haven't done anything wrong.
Last chance.
ID now, or you're going in for loitering and obstruction.
Then you're making an unlawful arrest on camera.
In broad daylight.
Very.
Eleanor Vance, a woman who spent 35 years upholding the law as a respected federal court clerk, found herself in handcuffs on a sunny Tuesday afternoon for the simple crime of waiting. She was 72 years old, a grandmother, a gardener, and the very picture of quiet dignity. But to one police officer, she was simply someone who didn't belong. His decision to arrest her was a catastrophic failure in judgment, a gross abuse of power, and a mistake that would cost the city of Edgewater Pines $1.1 million. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Crestview Market sits in the heart of Edgewater Pines, an affluent suburb where manicured lawns and luxury SUVs are the norm. It's the kind of store where people know the butcher by name, and the organic produce is displayed like jewels. It was a place of order, quiet, and overwhelmingly white. At 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday in April, the sun was warm on the pavement. Eleanor Vance had just finished her weekly grocery shopping. Her list, written in careful cursive on a notepad, included chamomile tea, whole wheat bread, and a small salmon fillet for dinner. She had lived in Edgewater Pines for 45 years in the same brick home where she and her late husband had raised their 2 children. She had been retired for 7 years after a 35-year career as the senior clerk of court for the United States District Court. She had handled thousands of cases, worked with judges and attorneys, and understood the intricacies of the justice system from the inside out. She was a woman of routine, of order, and of respect for the law. That day she was dressed in beige slacks, a pale blue silk blouse, and a cardigan. Her silver hair was tied back in a neat bun. She stood on the wide, clean sidewalk about 20 feet from the grocery store's automatic doors, her cart full of groceries resting neatly beside her. She had opened her rideshare app on her phone and was patiently waiting for her assigned car to arrive. She was doing nothing to attract attention. She spoke to no one. She was simply existing a citizen going about her business. But to Officer Mark Corrigan, her existence was an anomaly. Corrigan, 35, had been with the Edgewater Pines Police Department for 6 years. He had a record that should have been a string of red flags. 7 civilian complaints in 6 years, 5 of them alleging racial profiling. All had been closed due to insufficient evidence. But the pattern was clear. Corrigan saw himself as the guardian of Edgewater Pines' order, and to him, order had a very specific look. Recently, there had been a string of petty thefts in the area, teenagers snatching packages from porches. The description was vague, a black male. That information had put Corrigan on high alert. He was cruising slowly in his patrol car when he saw Eleanor Vance, an older black woman standing alone outside Crestview Market. How long had she been there? He'd passed by 5 minutes ago, and he was sure she'd been there then. In Corrigan's mind, a narrative began to form. She wasn't shopping. She was watching, casing the place. She didn't belong. It didn't matter that she was a 72-year-old woman. It didn't matter that she was impeccably dressed. To Corrigan, the color of her skin and her presence in this space was probable cause enough. He flicked on his lights, pulled his patrol car to the curb, and got out. Officer Corrigan approached Eleanor with a deliberate swagger, his hands resting on his duty belt in a gesture designed to project authority. Eleanor, who had been looking down at her phone, checking her driver's location, only looked up when his shadow fell over her. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Everything all right here?" His voice was flat, but there was an edge to it. Eleanor offered a small, polite smile, the kind she had given to lawyers, judges, and jurors for decades. "Good afternoon, officer." "Yes, thank you. I'm just waiting for my ride." She spoke clearly with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime working with language and procedure. Corrigan glanced at her grocery cart, then back at her. "You've been standing here for a while. Who are you waiting for? His question wasn't one of concern. It was an interrogation. Eleanor's patience didn't waver. Not a who or what. I'm waiting for a rideshare. It should be here in just a couple of minutes. She held up her phone slightly as if to show him the app. Corrigan ignored the gesture. In his mind, her calmness wasn't a sign of innocence. It was cunning. We've been having some trouble in this area, he said, his tone implying she was somehow connected to it. People loitering, looking suspicious. Eleanor lowered her phone, her smile fading just a bit. She understood the subtext. She'd seen it in courtrooms hundreds of times, the coded language used to justify baseless suspicion. Officer, she said, her voice still even and respectful. I have lived in Edgewater Pines since 1981. I have just purchased my groceries at this store. I am simply waiting for my transportation home. She had given him context history and a perfectly reasonable explanation. For an impartial police officer, the conversation would have ended there. But Corrigan was not impartial. He was driven by a bias so ingrained it distorted the reality in front of him. He didn't see a long-time resident and retired public servant. He saw an outsider, a potential threat to his suburban peace. I'm going to need to see some identification, he demanded. This was the turning point. Eleanor knew her rights. She wasn't driving. She wasn't committing a crime. The demand was baseless. Do you think citizens should be required to provide ID when they aren't suspected of a specific crime? Drop your answer below. With the patience of someone who had explained the law to confused people for years, she replied, Officer, I'm happy to tell you my name. It is Eleanor Vance. I live at 124 Maple Drive. However, as I have done nothing wrong, I am not obligated to produce my papers, and I'd prefer not to take my wallet out right here. Eleanor Vance's calm and legally sound assertion of her rights did not de-escalate the situation with Officer Corrigan. It poured gasoline on the fire of his prejudice. He interpreted her knowledge of the law as defiance, her composure as insolence. In his worldview, an innocent person would comply fearfully, not quote their civil rights. Ma'am, he said, his voice turning cold, you fit the description of a suspect in a series of recent thefts. It was a blatant lie. The description was for someone 50 years her junior, but it was a lie he felt empowered to tell to gain compliance. Eleanor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She had spent her entire career in a world of facts and evidence. His bald-faced lie was both insulting and alarming. That's impossible, officer, she said, her voice still steady. I'm quite certain the description is not for a 72-year-old woman. Corrigan took a step closer, invading her personal space. I'm the one who decides who fits the description. Now I'm going to ask you one more time. Show me your ID, or I'm placing you under arrest for loitering and obstructing an investigation. The threat hung in the warm afternoon air. Loitering. She was standing with a $150 cart of groceries. Obstructing. She had answered his questions truthfully. This was a gross abuse of authority, and they both knew it. Eleanor took a slow, deep breath. She decided to try one more approach to reason her way through his wall of bias with technology. Officer, perhaps this will clear things up, she said, her voice a final appeal to reason. This is my phone. As you can see, this is the rideshare app. It shows my driver, David, is in a gray Toyota and is just 2 minutes away. She held the phone up the screen, clearly displaying the map and car information. It was irrefutable proof, a digital verification of her story. Any reasonable person would have seen this and recognized their mistake. But Corrigan wasn't being reasonable. He looked at the phone screen not as an explanation, but as a distraction, a trick. His logic was so warped by his bias that he was no longer capable of processing facts. He had decided she was guilty, and every action she took was filtered through that lens. That's enough, he snarled. You've had your chance to cooperate. Before Eleanor could react, he moved. The moment seemed to stretch into slow motion. Officer Corrigan lunged forward. his hand shooting out not to take the phone but to grab Eleanor's wrist. She let out a small, sharp cry of surprise and pain as his fingers clamped down on her delicate arm. The phone tumbled from her hand, clattering onto the pavement. "Turn around," he commanded, his voice hard and unforgiving. He roughly twisted her arm behind her back, showing no regard for her age or her obvious physical frailty. Pain, sharp and biting, shot through her shoulder, made worse by the arthritis that lived there. Eleanor had spent her life believing in the rightness of the law, but here was the law physically assaulting her. "Officer, you are hurting me," she said through clenched teeth, refusing to give him the satisfaction of tears. The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs echoed in the air as he ratcheted them tight around her wrists. They were too tight, the metal biting into her thin skin. The public, violent act of arresting an elderly woman shattered the afternoon tranquility of Crestview Market. People started to notice. A young woman pushing a cart out of the store stopped, her eyes wide with disbelief. A man loading groceries into his SUV stood up straight, his mouth agape. And then the inevitable in the 21st century happened. Cell phones emerged. The young woman raised her phone, her thumb hitting the record button. The man by the SUV did the same. Within seconds, at least 3 cameras were documenting the humiliation of Eleanor Vance. They captured her pained but composed face, Corrigan's unnecessary aggression, her abandoned phone on the ground, and her forgotten groceries in their cart. "What the hell are you doing?" the man by the SUV yelled. "She's an old woman. She didn't do anything." Corrigan shot a glare at the onlookers, his face flushing with anger. "Step back. This is police business," he barked. He pulled Eleanor toward the patrol car, his roughness amplified by the attention. "I am a retired federal official," Eleanor said, her voice loud and clear for the benefit of the recording cameras. "This arrest is unlawful. Your name is Officer Corrigan. Everyone here is a witness to this." She did not resist, but she would not be silent. She was creating a record using the same skills she had honed over her career to ensure the truth was documented. The back door of the patrol car opened with a protesting squeak. Officer Corrigan pushed Eleanor inside, his clumsiness showing a complete lack of concern for her dignity or comfort. She stumbled onto the hard plastic seat, her hands cuffed behind her back, making it impossible to brace herself. He slammed the door shut, sealing her in the cramped hot space. For a moment she just sat there, her breath catching in her chest, the pain in her wrists and shoulder throbbing in time with her heart. Through the metal cage separating the back from the front of the car, she could see Corrigan speaking into his radio, his voice full of self-righteous justification. Outside, the witnesses were still filming their faces, a mixture of outrage and shock. This was Edgewater Pines. Things like this didn't happen here, but it was happening. The drive to the police station was only 10 minutes long, but for Eleanor it was a lifetime of humiliation. She had driven these streets thousands of times, to the library, to church, to friends' houses. Now she was seeing them from the back of a police car, treated like a common criminal. The indignity was profound. She wasn't an anonymous face. She was Eleanor Vance, who volunteered at the library book sale and brought soup to sick neighbors. She had lived an exemplary life, one built on integrity and community service. All of that seemed to have been erased by the prejudice of one man. Instead of succumbing to despair, her mind shifted into the mode she knew best, that of a court clerk. She began to document everything. She noted the time on the car's clock. She mentally rehearsed Corrigan's exact words. She catalogued the feeling of the cuffs cutting into her skin, the amount of force he had used, the presence of the witnesses. She was building a case in her mind, piece by piece, creating a record that would be impossible to challenge. They arrived at the station, a modern brick building that was meant to be a symbol of safety and justice. Corrigan led her out of the car with the same unnecessary roughness as before and walked her inside. Heads turned as they passed. Desk clerks, other officers, they all saw a young officer parading in an elderly, well-dressed black woman in handcuffs. The looks on their faces ranged from confusion to concern. This was not a typical sight. Corrigan marched up to the front desk, a smug self-satisfaction in his stride. "I've got one for loitering and obstruction," he announced to the desk sergeant Frank Miller, a man near retirement with a face that showed 30 years on the force. Miller looked over his reading glasses, first at Corrigan, then at Eleanor. He took in her neat clothes, her dignified posture even in cuffs, and the clear-eyed calm in her gaze. Then he looked back at Corrigan. "Corrigan," Miller said slowly, his voice low and heavy. "What in the hell is this?" Sergeant Miller stood up, his experienced eyes never leaving Eleanor. He'd seen enough bad arrests in his career to recognize one on sight. "Explain," he commanded Corrigan, his voice stripped of all patience. Corrigan launched into his story, a twisted version of events colored by self-justification. Subject was loitering outside Crestview Market acting suspiciously. She matched the description of a bolo for theft, refused to provide ID, and became uncooperative. Miller listened, his skepticism growing with every word. He then turned to Eleanor. "Ma'am," he said, his tone significantly more respectful than Corrigan's. "What is your side of this?" Eleanor spoke, her voice clear and measured, laying out the facts with precision. "Sergeant, my name is Eleanor Vance. I have been a resident of this city for 45 years. I was waiting for a pre-arranged car service after purchasing groceries. Officer Corrigan approached me and accused me of loitering. I explained the situation, but he refused to listen. When I asserted my right not to produce identification as I was committing no crime, he forcibly arrested me." She paused for a beat. "And for the record, I am retired after 35 years as the senior clerk of court for the United States District Court." The room fell silent. The phrase "senior clerk of court for the United States District Court" hung in the air. Corrigan's face went pale. Sergeant Miller took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, the gesture of a man who realizes his afternoon just became exponentially worse. "Corrigan," Miller said, his voice dangerously low, "do you have any idea what you've done?" Miller turned to his desk and typed Eleanor Vance's name into his computer. The screen populated instantly, no criminal record. Address confirmed. A perfectly clean file. He looked at Corrigan, who was now shifting his weight from foot to foot. "The bolo you're referring to is for a black male approximately 18 years old. Do you really want me to believe that she fits that description?" Corrigan stammered. "Well, you know, sometimes—" "Shut up." Miller cut him off. "Just shut up." He turned to another officer. "Get these handcuffs off Mrs. Vance right now, and get her a glass of water." As the cuffs were removed, Eleanor rubbed her wrists, revealing angry red marks on her skin. She accepted the water with a nod of thanks. It was then that the sergeant's phone began to ring. Then another. An officer from the front room came rushing in. "Sergeant, we have a problem. Videos of this arrest are all over the internet. The news channels are calling." The public relations nightmare had begun, and the Edgewater Pines Police Department was at the center of the storm. Miller looked at Corrigan with disgust. "You brought a hurricane into my house, son. I hope you're ready for the fallout." Within the hour, the story had exploded. The videos captured from multiple angles went viral across social media. The headlines wrote themselves, "72-year-old grandmother arrested for waiting while black. Retired federal court clerk handcuffed outside grocery store." Hashtag Justice for Eleanor began trending nationwide. The public outrage was immediate and intense. It wasn't just a story about a wrongful arrest. It tapped into a deeper national nerve about race, age, and police abuse of power. Eleanor's son, a corporate attorney in the city, arrived at the station as soon as he heard. He found his mother sitting in the sergeant's office, composed but visibly shaken, while senior police officials attempted to stumble through an apology. Their apologies were too little too late. The damage was done. By the end of the day, top civil rights firms had reached out to the Vance family. They saw what everyone else saw, a clear-cut, indefensible case. A lawsuit was filed the following week. It named Officer Mark Corrigan, the Edgewater Pines Police Department, and the city itself as defendants. The allegations were damning and meticulously documented unlawful arrest. There was no probable cause to believe Eleanor had committed any crime. False imprisonment. She was held against her will without legal justification. Excessive use of force. The violent application of handcuffs on a non-resistant 72-year-old woman. Violation of civil rights. She was targeted based on her race in violation of the 14th Amendment. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Corrigan's conduct was deemed outrageous and had caused her severe distress. The lawsuit didn't just focus on Corrigan's actions that day, it delved into his history, listing the 7 prior complaints against him. It argued that the department knew or should have known of Corrigan's propensity for discriminatory behavior, and that their failure to discipline or retrain him constituted systemic negligence. They had created the monster that was now destroying their reputation. For the city of Edgewater Pines, the lawsuit was a full-blown catastrophe. The video evidence was irrefutable. The victim was a model citizen with an impeccable career. The officer had a documented history of problems. The city's attorneys knew that taking this case to a jury would be an act of financial and public relations suicide. They had no defense. Faced with an avalanche of evidence and mounting public pressure, the attorneys for the city of Edgewater Pines moved quickly to settle. There was no protracted fight, no attempt to defend the indefensible. The negotiation process was swift. 10 weeks after the arrest, a settlement was announced. The city would pay Eleanor Vance $1.1 million. It was a substantial figure designed not only to compensate Eleanor for her pain and humiliation, but to send a clear message that such conduct would not be tolerated. But the consequences didn't stop with the check. Officer Mark Corrigan was fired. An internal investigation concluded that he had violated multiple department policies, including those on use of force and impartial policing. His name was submitted to the National Decertification Index, ensuring his career in any reputable law enforcement jurisdiction was over. The city was also forced into sweeping reforms. They agreed to a consent decree monitored by an independent watchdog mandating comprehensive retraining on implicit bias de-escalation techniques and constitutional stops for every single officer. They overhauled their civilian complaint process, creating a civilian review board with real power to recommend discipline. These were significant changes forced upon them by the national spotlight Eleanor's case had created. Eleanor Vance never wanted to be an activist. She just wanted to buy her groceries and go home. But when confronted with injustice, she responded with the same grace and strength that had defined her life. She spoke at the city council meeting where the settlement was approved. Her voice did not tremble as she addressed the packed room. "I stood in front of courts for 35 years, and I always believed in the promise of equal justice under the law," she said. "On April 16th, that promise was broken for me. If my 35 years of service, my clean record, and my silver hair could not protect me from being treated like a criminal on the street I have walked for nearly half a century, then we must ask ourselves who that promise truly protects." She paused, letting her words sink in. This settlement is not a victory. It is an acknowledgement of a profound failure. My hope is that this failure becomes a lesson about bias, a lesson about accountability, and a lesson about the basic human dignity we owe to one another. The room was silent, and then it erupted in applause. Though legally and financially vindicated, a scar remained. The incident had fractured her sense of safety in her own community. It was a painful reminder that for some, prejudice can erase a lifetime of accomplishment in an instant. Her story forced Edgewater Pines and communities like it across the country to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the greatest threat to order isn't a stranger, but the biases of the very people sworn to protect it. Does real change happen when it's driven by a lawsuit instead of a true change of heart and mind? And what can we do as a society to ensure that a person's dignity is never subject to another's prejudice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support for this channel helps us continue to ask these important questions.